What episode is it?
311.
311. Hey everybody, it's Gary Bay, Nerd Chuck, and this is episode 311 of the Ask Gary V show, and one that I will watch in perpetuity forever. Easily one of the most important men of my life without him fully knowing it. To this, every single code that I ever had on my ATM, on my passwords. Several years ago when I started realizing more people knew who I was, I had to go and change everything from January 12th, 1969, because I felt that people would eventually figure out that those were all my passwords.
That's great.
Joe, it's a real honor to have you here. Obviously, my fan base knows literally what you probably don't know is I immigrated to this country from the Soviet Union. I originally lived in Queens and then moved to Edison, New Jersey, and the real way I got Americanized was absolutely New York Jets football. My first season back to John Riggins, we were talking before we started this, was the 82 season, which was a great one for the Jets. And, you know, obviously had they beaten Miami, they would have played John Riggins' skins in that game. And literally from that day on, it has become the core thing in my life is the New York Jets besides my family. So you can imagine how much fun it is to have you here. So thanks for being on.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I have a lot of things I want to talk to you about, and the format of the show is we're going to do calls. Obviously, I've been promoting on social, so a bunch of people are going to be super excited to call in. I'm going to start with a couple of different things. I think, you know, the one luxury of actually being a hardcore Jets fan and is that I think I can take these in different directions than the normal stuff. So actually what I want to talk about is the season after the Super Bowl. A game that kind of still sits, obviously this happened, I was born in 75, but the game against the Chiefs that we lost in the playoffs the next year. I guess my first question would be, was the team after the Super Bowl a better team than the Super Bowl team? And obviously better is a funny word, but did you think we were going to win Super Bowl IV?
I didn't necessarily think we were going to win Super Bowl IV, but we felt like we were playing well, and we ended up playing a team that outplayed us that day, the Kansas City Chiefs, man. Yeah. And you bring it up, Gary, it was a windy, cold, funky day in Shea, man. Yeah.
We were home.
We were home, and we got held to 6 points. All right?
I'm aware.
Bobby Bell, they had more 4 or 5 defensive players in the Hall of Fame now. You know, I mean, they were good. And I remember a play that I actually thought about trying to fool Bobby Bell during the week when we're getting ready, and I made a big mistake. You don't fool Bobby Bell, you know, a great linebacker that he was. And we only scored 6 points. They beat us, man.
When I bring up that game, right? What are the biggest things that you think about? Like, did that game stick with you? Because obviously, I mean, and some of this stuff I might get wrong because obviously I wasn't around. But the next season you got hurt, right? Because next season was a 4-11 season, right? And it was like how much? I don't know you well enough to know, you know. Is it stuff you think about? Is it not? But that season, for some reason, I don't know why it sticks. Obviously, everybody talks about the prior season, but there's, you know, and Len Dawson, you know, what kind of player was Len Dawson?
Lenny Dawson was sweet, man. I mean, he was sweet. He was smooth. I tried to run like Lenny Dawson. I'm talking about jogging on and off the field. You know, I was impressed with his mannerisms, his coolness. He was a real gentleman, and he was brilliant as a player.
But that game, that season, like, did that hurt for a long time, or were you had so much going on in your life at that point? Obviously, the prior season puts you on a pedestal in this city, the biggest city in the world. Are you the kind of guy that after that game, you're devastated for 24 hours, you think about it for a month, or you go down to Miami and have fun? Like, what kind of guy were you? Like, I'm very curious what happens after that level of adversity. I assume we're at home. You're pretty, you know, the Raiders were a really good team that year too, so you have to face those guys again if you win. But like, were you upset, or were you kind of like you understood that they outplayed you? Like, how did your psyche? I'm trying to get into the mindset of you're walking off the field, and then what happens the next 30 days?
Gary, I'll share with you what my head coach told my freshman class of football players at the University of Alabama the first time we met our head coach and had a meeting with him. Coach Paul Bear Bryant, he stood up in front of us and he said, I'm going to teach y'all how to keep from beating yourselves. Now, I came from PA, man. It's tough for me to understand him, and we won a championship back there in Beaver Falls, and that sounded to me like, what, playing conservative or playing scared? I'm going to teach y'all how to keep from beating yourselves. And then he said, you're going to remember the losses, the mistakes, the games you didn't play well in, more than you're going to remember the good games, even the big games you won.
Yep.
To this day, you bring up the Kansas City Chiefs game in 1969, I promise you, that's one of the ones we're talking about, coming from Coach Bryant. Losing to Texas by senior year in the Orange Bowl. That jumps up at me. Losing once to that team from across Alabama State, Auburn, I probably don't know most folks, but they were losing to them. That gets me right here to this day. Sure, we won the championship, man, and I mentioned high school, college. The goal for every player should be to make the team, own up. You've got to be good enough to get on any team, whether it's Little League Baseball, junior high basketball. You've got to make the team, and the next goal should be to win the championship.
That's right.
And we did it on those levels, and I'm thrilled about that. But I think of the games I played like a bum first.
Do you think you played like a bum in that game?
In which game? The Kansas City Chiefs game?
I know there's 4 picks in that game,
but
you know, real football fans know some of those are on the quarterback and some of them are not.
And some are on a good defensive play, and they can make excuses about the hawk or all that stuff.
Missed
Talking about the hawk, the wind was, you know. But no, I mean, I didn't play well. Had I played well, we would have possibly won the game. You know what? And that triggers a thought when we think about Tom Brady. I think about Tom Brady in this day and age, and after watching him over the years, I know I literally lost the game or more when I played for the Jazz. I haven't seen Tom Brady in 18 years, or since he's been playing for the Patriots, cost them a game.
Well, you know what's funny? Because the playoff game that we went up there and beat them on, I thought the pass that he threw, that David Harris intercepted, changed the complete complexity of that game throughout the rest of the game. So I'll chalk that up to Tom Brady's loss.
Okay, that's one play.
I'll take it. I'll take it. I want it. Listen, I'm hanging on here, Joe.
Right.
I'm hanging. You know, as a diehard Jets fan, that name is tough to deal with, as you can imagine. Let me ask you another question that I was really curious about. This is getting. By the way, everybody who's watching, you put in calls. I'm going to talk to Joe a lot about marketing, because I think what Sonny did, and we'll get into this with. I'm very curious from your perspective of being the human. There is no question in my mind. And my brother AJ and I started this marketing company, and several years ago he left to follow his passion. And my brother is in the football sports representation business. So he's a football agent. Obviously, we come from marketing background, so you can imagine I'm very affected with the way you became who you were in the public eye, and that wasn't just who you were as a charismatic, successful player. It was the people around you that were helping you make decisions on brand deals. The SI cover is all time. The pantyhose thing is all time. There's a lot of things that were done between you and your team that has created the legendary status that you are. You know, obviously the game is so disproportionately powerful, but I don't think people understand how a full thing is usually built. So for everybody who's watching, because I know marketing and entrepreneurship is such a big part of me in this show, we'll get to that. You're going to have to stick with me, because I'm going very nerd football here, because I've got to see it through for myself. I'm very curious, and I actually don't have as much knowledge about this, because this is the period where I don't know as much about. Richard Todd. This is very interesting to me, because the 82 season is my first season, and he was the Jets quarterback at that time, so he was my first Jets quarterback. He, you know, when I look at the history books and read stuff, he comes into the team with all this fame and things of that nature. There's a story I can't recall about something with, you said some amazing joke to him at like a training camp or something. I don't remember the whole story, and I might even be getting it wrong. I'm curious, as a nerdy Jets fan, where were you at the point of your career? What was your relationship like with him? Like, tell me, like, when I say that name, give me a story or two that maybe you haven't told, or like, give me a scoop here, Joe. Tell me something about you and Richard Todd.
Every year that I played pro football, the 13 years that I played, I would go back to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, to train. That's right. That's where I'd go do my training. I'd go
Joe, I'm
back.
going to interrupt you, and I apologize if everyone's laughing now, because I love to do it. As a PA boy, I mean, obviously I've seen you talk about a lot. Coach down there, and that scene, like, that was really transformational for you that time down there, huh?
It was. I didn't even visit the campus before I went there. I didn't know Coach Paul Bear Bryant at the time. I saw Alabama play one game before I went there, and that was in the Liberty Bowl on black and white television, and I really didn't know anything about it.
Who came in second for Joe Namath?
Second where?
If you didn't go to Bama, where would have you gone?
Maryland, University of Maryland, and I passed the college boards, but I didn't score high enough on the college boards.
You flat out wanted to go to Maryland?
No, I didn't want to go to college. I wanted to play baseball.
Is that true?
I had the opportunity to sign a baseball contract. But at home, there was a time that we still, did what your mother or your father said. And my father and mother had divorced early on. Not so early, but it was early in my life. And now it was time to decide what the youngest in the family was going to do, go to college or sign the baseball contract. And so we had a meeting at the house. My oldest brother ran the meeting. My mother was sitting there. And Brother Bob said, well, Mom, he turned to her, he said, Mom, what do you want Joe to do? And my mother said, oh, I want Joey to go to college. Bob hit the table. That's it. You go to college.
That was it.
That was it.
And were you pissed?
I was crushed. I couldn't be too angry because Bob could still beat me up then.
Sure.
But
you were really disappointed?
I like Tom Nugent, the coach there. I liked his style of football. They threw it a lot.
Yep.
He started the I formation when he was at Florida State. And he was just a charismatic guy.
And so this was not an era where a big prospect like Joe Namath, with not passing the boards, like Maryland couldn't figure out some funny, that wasn't the ecosystem in college football back then?
It didn't work that way, and what happened is Coach Nugent called Coach Bryant and let him know that I was still loose.
Interesting.
And unbeknownst to me, I didn't know Howard Schnellenberger, an assistant coach at Alabama at that time, showed up at our house in Beaver Falls. There's a knock at the door, and he came in and talked to my mother. She went upstairs, packed me a suitcase you could put under the front seat of this, bus seat now on a plane. It was that big. Came downstairs, gave me a $5 bill, and looked at Coach Schnellenberger and said, "Take it." And that was it, man. I was off to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I never heard of Tuscaloosa, Alabama before that.
What about Alabama itself?
Well, they did see him playing the Liberty Bowl.
Sure.
I liked their style,
Yeah.
man. They had dark headgears and white uniforms that day, I remember, and I caught myself pulling for them, but they lost.
And so, back to the story. So you go down, and Todd is down there in one of those off seasons.
Well, you see, I was, again, already playing pro ball, but I'd go back to train May, June, early June, before our training camp. And Richard was the quarterback at